Everybody, welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Legislative and Government Affairs Committee of Bessie, and I'd like to call it to order. So, may we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Pell? Mr. Pell is present. Dr. Armstrong? Dr. Armstrong is present. Mr. Birkin? Mr. Birkin is present. Mr. Castile?
Here.
Mr. Castile is present. Ms. Champagne? Ms. Champagne is present. Dr. Clark? Dr. Clark is present. Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris is present. Mr. Hollis? Mr. Hollis is present. Ms. Holloway? Ms. Holloway is present. Ms. Mellarine? Ms. Mellarine is present. Mr. Morris? Mr. Morris is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. So let's get right to it. Items for consideration. Item 2.1 is consideration of an update report regarding the 2024 third extraordinary session. Do I have a motion to receive? I have a motion by Dr. Armstrong to receive and not Doctor, Conrad, the engineer down there. So we have the motion. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to you, Beth.
Good afternoon, Beth Ciano with the department. We wanted to give you just a brief overview of the bills that
Ms. Ciano,
passed.
Can you pull it a little bit closer to you?
Is that better? It is on.
It's on.
Yeah.
Yeah, just get it close to you.
Okay. So we just wanted to give you a brief overview of the bills that passed during the special session that impact education. We'll start with House Bill 7 by Representative Emerson, which is now Act 1. This is the bill that actually places a constitutional amendment on the ballot for a March 29, 2025 election. Within that constitutional amendment would be the option to eliminate the Education Excellence Fund, which is actually supported by the Millennium Fund, and the crux of those funds would be eliminated, as well as the AG funds. In that constitutional amendment, it asks that those just be eliminated from the law. And so that would mean that those funds that are normally invested, totaling almost $196 million is the estimate received by the Treasury, that money instead would actually be used to apply to the TRSL UAL and pay off about a fourth of that $8 million cost. The amount of the investments when sold, should the amendment pass, is somewhat in flux. The $196 million in working with information, the leaders of TRSL and the Treasury, they are hopeful that it will generate the $196 million. What that would actually do if they pay off that fourth of the, it's actually $2 billion. Too many numbers in my head. It's $2 billion that it actually would generate because it's coming from the investments of EVE and the investments from 8G. And that would actually, if they use that to pay off the UAL, that would reduce the employer contribution rate that is actually paid right now by the school systems and other charters that participate in TRSL. It would reduce what was originally scheduled to be a 20.95% contribution rate in 25-26. Instead, that would be reduced to about 16%. That savings has been calculated to be about enough to generate what could support a teacher pay raise, and that is spoken about. We'll talk briefly in a minute about the companion bill that would require a pay raise. But the rate reduction produces about a $219 million. If they have the $2 billion, then it produces savings of about $219 million. Again, it could depend on what that is, But in working with TRSL, we were able to make some estimates of what a pay raise would cost for those participating in TRSL. And so if the savings is generated at about $219 million from the rate reduction, then that would cover a pay raise of $2,000 for certificated, $1,000 for support personnel, costing the participants in TRSL about $177 million. So if all the predictions, that scenario runs through, there would be enough money for the TRSL participants to provide a pay raise in that amount. What that does to the EAF money, just to remind you, EAF is an allocation that we've been getting on an annual basis for many years. In the current year, it's about $11.5 million that's appropriated. Should the constitutional amendment pass and that fund be eliminated, we would no longer have access to that $11.5 million. In addition, the 8G money is about $20.5 million in the current year, and that is also scheduled to be eliminated should the constitutional amendment pass. I'll stop right there and see if there's any questions. I know that's a lot of data on that particular issue. If there are none, I'll move to the next bill.
We do. Mr. Appel?
Thank you. I'm just curious, we're going to pay down the principal, whatever you call it, in the retirement plan, but what is the savings rate of interest that's based on the calculation? In other words, how much is the actuaries saying they've got to earn in order for us to see that I think you said 177 million in savings? Do you know?
No, I don't have that specific information. We ran about 7 different simulations in partnership with TRSL, making certain assumptions, but I was given what they anticipated, would be the money that would be available based on their actuary, analysis. They stand by that almost $2 billion right now being available. I think they're working closely with Treasury to see whether or not that materialized. Obviously, it's impacted by the market at the time.
Obviously, yeah.
And they have a certain period of time in which they need to do this, because if the constitutional amendment passes in the election of March 29th, there's a certain period that it has to be certified as true and accurate. And they only have until May the 1st to actually get the money to TRSL. So there will be, they're watching the market closely.
It's an ongoing thing, though. So 5 years from now, they're still counting on the interest savings, basically, is what we're looking at. So if the rate changes dramatically, we may not get enough to cover those pay raises. It's hypothetical, and it's based on best case, worst case scenarios, I suppose.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Preston, did you have a question?
So the balance left in TRSL will be what, about $6 billion left?
Yes.
Is that essentially?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions
One
before we go
more,
to our next
one
presentation?
more. So
Oh,
if
go
there's
ahead.
an excess, suppose there's an additional savings because of interest rate swaps, could that be used, or would that be by law applied to that balance he's talking about? In other words, if they earn more savings, what happens to it?
I think we would have to ask TRSL about that. The law does not actually speak to any additional savings. In other words, it just talks about the liquidation of the funds themselves and the availability based on how the investments, when they're sold, what
yeah.
that value is. So that is up and down depending on the market. So I think that value
Is
if
fixed
it-
at that
if
point in
it's-
time?
Right, if it's better, then I think that can go out, but it all depends on the market. They're planning and doing calculations and estimates based on
Right.
several different scenarios about what the market will yield.
Gotcha.
This
Thank
is
you.
the actuarial report from, back in like
Right.
late October,
So if
early
there is some
November.
addition, we don't know what's going to happen, but I mean, theoretically, I guess it could go pay down the principal, so.
Right, I think whatever the value of the investments, because it's all tied to what is in the investment accounts for education excellence coming from the Millennium Fund, the portion that is supports education excellence, and the sales with regards to the 8G funds
Right.
that are invested.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. Let me get Simone.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Champagne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Beth, the money that's going to be used to pay down the TRSL, that's for the systems, right? The state will still have a debt that the state will have to pay? Is that correct? So what are they going to use to pay down their portion of the debt? The state, do you know?
No, the application, as I understand it from the TRSL executive, that is just going towards the UAL, the $8 billion in the UAL. It's just going to pay that down. And as a participant, the school systems and a few charters, they will benefit from the reduction of the rate, and that's what will create the savings. If the state has any, participants in TRSL, I think there's a few agencies that might have that they would benefit from some of the rate reduction for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Morris, did you have a question?
I was just curious, the outstanding $6 billion, if this goes through, what's the forecasted date that it would be paid off?
I think that remains at 2039, I think.
2039?
Yeah, I think it's 2039.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Any other questions before we go to Mr. Walker's presentation on this particular?
Sorry, one more.
Yes, sir.
Isn't there a constitutional provision that this money has to be paid by 2029 or 2027? That we have to pay down the original?
There's two of them.
Yeah, there's two of them.
You have the original UAL. and
Right,
then
the original.
Yeah. And I think that there was one that's got to be paid by 2029, and then there's,
So this, does that count for that? In other words, is this being applied to that constitutional provision, or do we know?
I'm not
I'll
sure.
have to get clarification from the
Yeah.
TRSL folks about that.
Because that would eliminate the excess by then anyway, it seems like.
Yeah.
Just where you get the money.
Yeah, well, back when I was chairman of retirement many years ago, I actually had black hair back then, but we were well on schedule to get it paid down.
Right,
So
I understand
This should hopefully get the UAL hopefully paid down at some point all the way, I would hope, in conjunction with the Constitution.
Just a couple other comments on HB 5, which was Representative Bakla's bill about this pay raise, Act 8 now. What that does is it requires the participants in TRSL, if they are the beneficiaries of the savings, should this constitutional amendment pass, they have to use the savings that are identified for teacher pay raise in the amount of $2,000 certificated and $1,000 for support. We did, in working with TRSL, we did run about 7 different simulations, depending on, how much the savings are generated based on the investments and their value when sold. At best case scenario, that is the one that I referenced, that a pay raise for those participants cost about $177 million. There should be enough savings beyond that for, for that pay raise to be provided. At that point, there are a couple of systems that are about $69,000 short. As you work through each of the scenarios, that was best case, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is where the investments produce much smaller, income or proceeds. At the worst case scenario, it would take several $1 million in order to be able to plug the holes for the systems who would be short. So we have, working with TRSL, and we did make those estimates and make sure.
Well, just one question on that. I know I have some in my district that I've seen a letter where they're going to be short. Refresh my memory on Act 8. It requires that the savings go to a minimum of $2,000 teacher. If that savings didn't equate to 2,000, is that local district still obligated, according to number 8, to give a $2,000 raise? And is the state going to pitch in to make up the difference? You see what I'm saying? The ones that you said were short.
Right. It does talk in the language to the bill, and if you have something to add, Tony, but it does talk about them doing it to the extent possible. In committee testimonies, there was some discussions about, possibly, identifying funds to make them whole. There's been no action taken on that as of yet.
Right, and that's why I wanted to bring that up to our members. You're going to have some districts that are going to be short. So once you find that out, get on the phone with your legislator and say, you've got to make up this difference because y'all basically promised it. It's not in law right now, is my understanding. It's got to be appropriated by either the executive budget or an appropriations committee. So keep an eye on those school districts in your Bessie district for this. I know I already have one, so.
Is a way, and it is possible that you may have to look to the appropriations bill for additional funding to fill that gap for some of those schools.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions for Beth or Tony? All right, Mr. Walker has a presentation on 8G.
So thank you, members. You had a handout before you, and I think the important companion topic that we should talk about this particular line item, I should say legislation, is the practical effects of elimination of these funds, both on the programmatic side and on Bessie operations side. So I'm not going to go belabor the point and go through all of the slides. Come on. So as Ms. Siano mentioned, there's about $20.5 million in funds, of which 96% of it is on the programmatic side and 4% of it is reserved on the operational side, in which Bessie uses for evaluating these programs, monitoring these programs, and cover staff costs in a certain degree. So I wanted to make it very clear and put it in a document for you to have when you're starting to formulate these discussions and have these conversations about what do we do going forward as a board, what does the board do going forward as a board to ask of the legislature, and that you know exactly what you're asking for and why and what is currently being funded with the $20.5 million allocation every year. And just so on this slide, you will see that about $870,000 of the $20.5 million allocation is reserved for operational stuff that Bessie does every day. During the superintendent's presentation, he talked about those fixed costs, such as rent, all our overhead, our ORM costs. What the Bessie staff does, we essentially braid state general fund with 8G funding, and we allocate a certain percentage of all of our costs that's allowable under law with 8G funding, and that amounts to about $870,000, everything from staff salaries to travel to our office rent, our computers, our copy machine telephones, and all of those things. So I thought it was important that we talk about, at least from that side, of the practical effect of elimination of those funds. And this is just a chart showing you currently how we're spending the 8G fund and what's its percentage towards our total budget. And as you can see, we have 3 employees that's 100% supported by 8G. Obviously, if the 8G fund is eliminated and does not appear in any form or fashion, those employees' positions would no longer be needed and obviously will be eliminated, but we still have the balance of our staff, as you can see, anywhere from 5% to 60% of their salary is paid for with 8G funding. And I just wanted to put that out there for everyone to see, again, so when we have these discussions, that we are being very finite in the things that we're asking for and why we're asking for it. And this is just an overview. Again, this is a best-case scenario for the office if 8G is eliminated and does not appear in any form. I would suggest that we need about $390,000 to operate a supplement of our state general funds to operate without any 8G operations going on. Obviously, if the 8G program shows up in any form, we would want that whole $870,000. But if it does not show up in any form, that is the baseline number that to keep the budget at a standstill of what it is currently, and it's just a breakdown of all those things that 8G is currently paying for in Bessie operations. This is just our what I call our cash flow, where we currently are, and just to give you another picture of how we braid together the 8G funding with everything that we do, and the percentages of where we currently are. And what's really, really important that I think that might be missed is this money will be transferred prior to the end of the fiscal year. We have to have a serious discussion about what do we do if this money is transferred on May 1st, because conceivably all the money that is used to support our operations, 8G, will be gone at that point, because it not only eliminates the trust fund, it eliminates the support fund in which we spend out of. So I have a serious concern that I want to bring to all the members, that we need to think about what do we do for the months of June and July to at least make it to the end of the fiscal year, because that money is transferred on May 1st, not the end of the fiscal year. And I think that probably wasn't talked about enough and flushed out. And so I'm trying to work on some answers, but I don't have any answers for you right now about what we will do in the 2 months to close out the fiscal year. This is an overview of the programs that are currently being funded. There's a lot of conversation about how many early childhood seats are being funded through 8G. And so what we wanted to do, again, is just put you the priority areas that we're currently funding and the amount that is allocated, that $20 million. And this is a breakdown of the funding. And as you can see, is in the large buckets from early childhood to STEM to professional development. But again, it gives you an idea, a more finite idea about the priority areas and the funding levels that the 8G program that is currently in existence, it funds. Come on. It's stuck.
We have the handout if you want to keep going.
Go. And actually, Shannon, that's the end of the PowerPoint. I thought it was
why I
another slide,
stopped.
but we took it out. So I just wanted, again, as we frame our discussion and our legislative strategy about what do we want to do with this fund being eliminated, that I wanted you to have these slides as a tool to frame the discussion about what exactly are we going to ask for from the legislature. Again, as the department has indicated, there was a lot of discussion about backfilling this money and making the agencies whole. But again, that's a will of the legislature to make that happen through the appropriations process. But at least once we start having those conversations, we know what's funded through our priorities and what are some of the things that we want to maintain. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Okay, just one comment real quick. On the June and July, if you will get us the information, this committee, of what we're exactly going to need, that's going to be something we can handle through the supplemental appropriations bill with chairman, either chairman of either committee, but most likely be the House Chairman, Jack McFarland. So we need to start working on that now. And then once we see on March 29th if the fund is going away, then we'll be in line on that supplemental bill to at least operate through the end of the fiscal year. So if you can get that to this committee ASAP, that'd be good.
Will do.
Any questions for Mr. Walker?
Yeah, I think you covered one of them, Mr. Chairman. I did want to get into, and I suspect that'll be the work of this committee going forward, those focused priority areas that you have on slide 12 that will no longer be funded or certainly impacted: high-quality early childhood education, college and career readiness, some things that we've actually placed greater emphasis on in terms of our accountability formula, for example, that we're sort of defunding it on one hand, but then creating perhaps additional expectations. I take it, Mr. Chairman, that part of the conversation that we're having is how do we backfill that money? How do we get resources as opposed to just simply eliminating support for these key areas like early childhood and college and career readiness, correct?
Right, and through this past legislative session, we got commitments, actually commitments, I believe, on the record that they would backfill this. I know, Mr. Morris, you heard, I believe, the head of the tax department say it at the table, as I did too, that they will backfill this stuff. And I've gotten some comments from legislators, and I know the administration is interested in making sure these programs continue at the level that 8G was funding. So we're going to stay on top of that and try to get it written into the executive budget. I've already talked to Mr. Walker about that.
And then, Mr. Walker, you're going to come back to us. By necessity, 3 positions will be eliminated because there will be no longer a need for that. And you're going to look at what areas where you can reposition staff and those sorts of things, and then come back to us with some thoughts and recommendations around that, correct?
Yes, sir. And to piggyback on Mr. Harris, we have, and Daria, if you could come to the mic to make sure I say this correctly, we have submitted a budget request to the division, and we have asked to be maintained whole. We talked with them extensively of how they wanted us to put it in the budget. And so what we essentially did, and we created a budget with the money gone, and we created a sub-budget with the money asking for the $20.5 million to be there. So we have submitted to the division our request to be maintained whole. And so that has been done already, and Daria can kind of talk a little bit about that process, how that will play out.
Right, so we did. We submitted the budget request as if the program would still continue, and we asked for an additional $1 million based on the revenues and stuff that we were receiving. So the budget request was a $21.5 million. And then we also asked for those costs and stuff that if the program was eliminated, then to at least where the funds were being braided, to at least to supplement that, those monies. So we did put it in our request.
And so we've been notified by the division tentatively that we'll have some internal budget hearings in January
Correct.
of 2025. So we should have by next Bessie in January, we should have a better understanding of what's the appetite to, first of all, get it included in the executive budget to make it to the Capitol. And so
And they're having meetings about it. And our budget analyst said we should be able to speak with the commissioner maybe in January. But they are looking into it. They're just trying to figure it out like we all are.
And in addition, to answer your question, Mr. Castro, yes, I will come to you with a reorganization plan if it does come to fruition that we have to eliminate positions and reposition folks and reposition the budget to reflect just the state general fund allocations.
Right. Thank you.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Walker? Okay, we have a motion to receive the report on 2.1. It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, 2.1 is passed. Next, 2.2, consideration of the Legislative and Governmental Affairs Work Plan and discussion regarding the 2025 regular legislative session. Do I have a motion? I have a motion by Dr. Armstrong, seconded by Mr. Birkin. Okay, y'all should have received a Gantt chart that has important dates on it and some information on the back of it. What this is are very important dates leading up to the beginning of this next fiscal session and to the adjournment of that session. So it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with these dates that are deadlines for legislators and deadlines for them to create bills and have them introduced on the House floor. But some that I just wanted to kind of go over with you, some of the important ones that we'll be working toward through all this budgeting process, and also any other bills that we may feel like we want to support or find some authors for, working with LDOE. And so these dates are extremely important that we know about them, and then we kind of work backwards from them. So the executive budget presentation is on the 28th of February. That's when the governor, I believe I'm reading, y'all got to forgive my eyes. I'm in between four glasses right now. But the 28th, that's when the governor will present his budget to the Appropriations Committee. So we have a lot of work to do with the executive department between now and the 28th. Hopefully, we'll be made whole in that executive budget, and then it gets to appropriations, which will make it a lot easier for us to defend that position. If it's not in the executive budget, then once they drop that budget, then we'll be working very hard with our appropriation chair and with our legislators to make sure that we get made whole as far as we can on that. So that's an important date to watch for. Then if you work backwards from that, I have some dates on here for us as members to keep in mind. And I'm not going to go through them in detail for the sake of time, but you will see that we want you to contact your contact your education committee folks on both sides of the House, Senate and House. If you haven't done so already, I sent you a list of those members on each committee that is in your district. Reach out to them, and that was also included in here, thank goodness. You can look at that. Those that are under you in your district, please have a relationship with them. It's very important that we have that relationship. Once we get into having to go over across the street, lobby for or against bills, you want to make sure you know these people by their first name, and none of them are mad at you. So that's very important to do right now. So the more you do right now helps us when we come to the session. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Harris, thank you for this information, but is it possible to get phone numbers, contact numbers?
For all of these,
Well, there's maybe a couple of them I don't have, but if it's possible,
sure.
have a list of contacts. If not, for all would be nice.
Okay, we'll get that together. Now, if there is one on there that you need to call before we can get the list out to you, just go to the website. Legislative website has good information on it.
Thank you.
And you can get their home office that may not have the cell. Text me, I might have their cell number, most likely. So, and I'll be glad to get that to you. Some other important dates. This is a fiscal session, so it's a short session. I won't go into the details about how the legislators have to do their bills, but it starts on April the 14th and it ends on June the 12th. So if you work backwards from that, on this chart, you'll see where the deadlines are for legislators to be able to come up with bills, to ask their various committee folks to put the bills together, and then when their final deadline to get the bill submitted to the House or to the Senate. So we'll be working through this. I will keep y'all posted very best I can. There's 10 more y'all besides me. So if you have a question, be sure and call me or send me an email. I'll respond to it as we go through this process. But the main thing is to familiarize yourself with these details, because you want to know the final week when bills are going to be dropped. We all need to be watching what is happening on the legislative website. And I can show y'all some tricks that we used as legislators. You can scan what bills drop by just saying by what committee, and every day if you look at it, any new ones will be added to that. So we want to stay abreast of that so that nothing sneaks through and surprises us. So that being said, Ben Lemoyne with the LDOE has an excellent spreadsheet that he puts together, or the department does, that we worked off of last year, and we will share that sheet. I just asked permission, and he said that was totally fine with him. But because it's such a good and comprehensive sheet, we're going to share the sheet with you. That'll be open to every member to look at, and it gives kind of the steps of where the bill is. Do we support it? Do we not? LDOE's position on the bill, and then kind of what the trajectory of that bill is. So be looking for that. That's something you want to look at often as we try to recruit you to go talk to your members that are in your district that we're either for or against the bill. Okay, and the last thing I'll say before we take questions and discuss this further, if you hear of something that you think is going to be dropped regarding Bessie or the Department of Education that would affect Bessie, please let me know. Let us know so that we can put it on the radar. I'll get with Mr. Lemoyne, say we heard this bill may be dropped by someone. So we can kind of look for that, kind of ask around the Capitol. My experience has been that sometimes when you catch those things in the early stage, you can sit down with that author and talk about it, and it's not necessary to drop that bill, if you know what I mean. We talk about it, so we need to know, we need to communicate. And the word communicate is probably the most important part of this committee. We have to communicate. I can't call all of y'all, and we can't meet all at the same time on Zoom because that'd be a public meeting deal, which we're not going to have to do because I'm going to keep y'all informed via text, email, singular phone calls, etc. But you need to drill information to me so I can disseminate it to everybody as we need it. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions. Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, I was looking at the list, and I just wanted to offer to Mrs. Mellorin, if you need any assistance with your representative, please give me a call, and I'll do whatever I can do to help.
Thank you. He is elusive and hard for me to get a hold of, so I would appreciate it.
Mr. Conrad Appel.
Just to reiterate what you're saying about communications, our efforts don't end with dropping of bills. There's a 60-day cycle for this session, and a lot happens in committee and on the floor. So if anybody hears of anything that's someone wants to amend something or something comes up, even if it's the littlest thing, they should funnel that through our chairman so that we can be prepared. The Senate's particularly bad on the floor because they don't announce amendments ahead of time. The House, at least, they have to publish their amendments so you can watch it. So if there's any information at all, it needs to flow through the chairman, and then he'll find a way to act on that information.
And I do appreciate that because the Senate is very dangerous. That's been my experience. But also, don't forget, on June the 12th, once they're out of session, there may be a bill that passes that we still don't like, and we may have to be over at the governor's office pleading with him to veto it. So this is a process that starts now, probably will go all the way through the middle of July. Mr. Birkin, did you have a question?
Just asking Dr. Kingham, is this a good opportunity for request Bessie salaries to go into the governor's?
We can't scratch that from the record because this is recorded, but you got paid today, you had lunch in the back, so. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, so first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Appel's recognition of the efficiencies of the House relative to the Senate. And then if you could, Chairman, maybe just review a little bit with the board our process here. In my service on Bessie, I think the process has been pretty consistent over time, but certainly with the new board, new additional perspective and whatnot, if you could just sort of take us through this regular process, how this spreadsheet with Mr. Lemoyne gets developed initially, and then on a, let's say on a week-by-week basis or whatever the appropriate time interval is, who's really going to be monitoring these things real time, and then the means of communication to board members who won't be focused on it real time, but want some timely updates. So just a little bit of review of the work process.
Right. As we get closer to session, LDOE and we didn't have anything last year as Bessie, but if we have some things that we want to push or fight or whatever, they're put on a spreadsheet. Mr. Lemoyne puts them on. And the way it's been done in the past, the officers would once a week get on a phone call with LDOE, which included the superintendent and staff, and then we would go through every one of those bills that were important to us. Now, every bill that goes through Education Committee, if I remember, was listed. And some of them may have a neutral on it or have no effect to us whatsoever, say higher ed or something like that. So you can just skip over those. But those bills that are important to us as Bessie or to LDOE, we would discuss. And we would say, where is it in the process? What do we need to do to assure that it's either defeated or passed? Then we talk about strategy, and then we would talk about when it's going to be in committee. So that's going to happen every week that the legislature is in session and these committees are meeting. So once a week, we'll look at that. And I plan on involving all of y'all that want to be involved on a weekly basis of going over that information. So it may be that we get to a very ugly bill that we know should not pass, that might try to destroy something we as a board have done in the past, one of our decisions. We will talk about that. And then we may say, I need you in committee to be there to testify for this bill or to be there for information purposes only. Mr. Lemoyne will be there. You go to every committee meeting, usually the superintendent's over there. So we're going to be asking a lot during session for y'all to go up, actually be proactive on these bills with our legislators. So that's kind of the process, I believe, Mr. Morris, you were talking about. Then as the bills go through the process, we drop them, or they get marked off on your spreadsheet, and we continue to follow the rest of them. So it's a week in and week out process. We have a great spreadsheet, and that's how we plan on doing it. And then we'll keep you informed as best I can. If you need some information, though, as we get real busy with this, please call me or text me, because I may forget to call or text you. It's not because I'm trying to ignore you or anything, but we'll talk about all these bills. But that's how we've done it in the past, and I think it was pretty effective last year. We were able to really enroll some of you guys' help in committees. It was very helpful, and so that's why we expanded this committee, thanks to Ms. Chapin's suggestion. And we started this committee, so we'll be ready to roll in next year. But does that satisfy you, Mr. Morris? Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? All right. So we do have one public comment. Madeline Batson with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children is here for information and wishes to speak.
Well, good afternoon, Bessie members. I'm Madeline Batson, Director of Policy and Research at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. As you know, we are a nonprofit independent source of data for specifically early childhood education issues and research, and we share it with people, including elected officials like you. As shown in the 2024 Fall Reading Report, only 30% of Louisiana children arrived at kindergarten meeting critical benchmarks this year, meaning that our teachers in the K-12 system are immediately responsible for remediating 70% of our children from day one. And we know that when children start behind, it is difficult to catch them up. Despite having 2/3 of Louisiana children under age 5 having all available parents in the workforce, only 1 in 5 of in-need birth to 4-year-olds in our state have access to high-quality and affordable early childhood programs. The regular and third special legislative sessions, as has been discussed this year, resulted in reduced funding for several of our state's early childhood education programs, including the Child Care Assistance Program, known as CCAP, and LA4. As a result, 720 children have already lost access to child care this year, and an additional 2,000 children are at risk of immediately losing their child care seat if the constitutional amendment eliminating 8G and the Education Excellence Fund passes in March of 2025. These actions exacerbate an already existing issue, that there are over 7,000 kids who are eligible for CCAP but are waiting on a wait list in our state. And those kids fold into the reality that there's over 100,000 kids in our state who are in need of childcare but do not have access to it. We know that when children, particularly those who enter at age 3 or earlier, experience high-quality early education, they are more likely to enter kindergarten ready, graduate high school, have higher earnings in adulthood, have better health outcomes, and are less likely to engage in criminal activity. Not only do our kids lose out by not having access, but their parents and our economy do too. The lack of affordable, high-quality ECE programs costs our state economy millions of dollars each year because parents of young children cannot reliably participate in the workforce. That causes disruptions in productivity for employers and income for parents. With a 13% return on investment in early education programs, investing in these early ed programs mean that we will spend fewer state dollars over the lifespan of the child. Rather than spending money on remedial adverse health or correctional services, we could be spending our money on building a bright future for our children and their parents. Our kids only get their early childhood education years once. By focusing on expanding ECE access, we have the opportunity to build on the tremendous growth our state has seen in national education rankings, literally that I saw a couple days ago, and truly catapult our children and their parents to success. As you consider your priorities for this upcoming legislative session, we hope you will continue to support a high-quality early childhood education system, building on our collective work for decades to work to increase quality, accountability, and access for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to share with members that Bessie Member Appel is going to be speaking to our legislature on Thursday, I think at 1 o'clock, on this particular topic. So if you have the opportunity to attend and support, then just want to make sure you're aware of that opportunity.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, there being none, we have a motion and a second on 2.2. Is there any objection? Being none, the motion has passed. That concludes our agenda, and so we are adjourned.